And welcome in, folks, to Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki, and on today's episode, breaking it down, a 34-16 Lions victory over the Jacksonville Jaguars in sunny Jacksonville, Florida. We'll break that one down for you. A lot of positives in that one. Also a question, can the Lions run the table in the next few weeks and go undefeated and really get back into that playoff hunt? We shall see. Also, big game against Atlanta next week. We'll break that one down for you in a little game day preview for the Lions game next week. And a big interview coming for you today. Lomas Brown, former Detroit Lion of 11 seasons, and also the Lions color analyst with Dan Miller on 760 WJR. He will join us later as well to discuss his career and about this current Lions team. So we have a loaded baked potato, and I'm very, very excited for this one because I love when we can break down Lions victories. I love when this team wins. And first off, I just want to start off. I hear so many negative criticisms of this team all the time, and in some instances, rightfully so, because they don't play up to how they're supposed to be playing. I get it. But when you win, I don't want to hear any of this negative stuff. I'm tired of hearing negative press even after a Lions victory. You play to win the game, as Herm Edwards says. These players are paid to win the game. The coaches are paid to coach winning teams. I don't want to hear it anymore. When the Lions win, yes, you could take some negatives away, but they won. Okay? I don't want to hear all this negative stuff, that this game doesn't mean anything and all that. This is their 5th game of the season, okay? They still have a shot, just in my eyes. Every game matters in this league. I don't want to hear anything about negativity over a loss. I don't want to hear it. 34-16, DeAndre Swift running for over 100 yards on 14 attempts, 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. First Lions rookie to go over 100 yards and score 2 touchdowns since Barry Sanders. Kenny Golladay also getting in on the mix, over 100 yards receiving. And defensively, they only gave up 44 rushing yards. A team that was averaging over 170 yards given up all season each game only gave up 44. Very, very impressive performance defensively. The defense really looked like they were playing with a lot of juice and a lot of energy out there. You know, you could hear it. The broadcasters even pointed out, Brock Heward, you know, you can hear the hitting from up in the booth. You can hear the energy that they're playing with and being aggressive and all that. And the Lions, they need that defensively. They need somebody that can set that tone. And I think this could be a big stepping stone. And I know it was against Jacksonville. I know Jacksonville is not that impressive, but if the Lions can really keep it up defensively and wreak havoc in the backfield and not allow the rushing yards, I think they can win some games. It's going to be tough against Atlanta, though, because the defensive backfield, I don't think Okudah had that good of a game either. You know, you saw him getting burned in man coverage again. And next week, he's going to be playing against better receivers. We'll get more into the Atlanta game later. But overall, I was impressed. I'm hoping that the Lions have found their bell cow in DeAndre Swift. I had a great game, and I know that the Lions like to kind of go running back by committee. And I'm fine with that, but to a certain extent. If there's a player that's playing well the whole game, you give him the rock. And I think the Lions did a good job, at least when Swift, you know, he broke out for that 54-yard run, I believe. You know, just keep giving him the rock. I don't want to be switching out backs all the time. However, it could work out in the end if they do running back by committee, if they continue. I think because, you know, if one guy is having a bad game, they can always hand it off to another guy, and he could have that potential. You know, like Kerryon Johnson. I think it's very obvious that his role has been changed on this team. He's not the lead guy anymore. I think it's very obvious. I mean, 4 attempts for 9 yards yesterday. He's more in there on pass blocking situations. He's one of the better blocking backs on the team. So they're using him more in those situations, but he has the potential, if any of those running backs, like Adrian Peterson, DeAndre Swift, if they ever get Bo Scarborough back healthy, you know, if any of those guys are lagging behind, you know, they can give it to Kerryon. They can give it to Adrian. That's why the running back by committee might work, but in certain situations. But it is always important to have kind of that one guy you can rely on, and I hopefully Swift can be that guy, be that number one running back that the Lions really need. All right, wanted to talk a little bit about Atlanta, the Falcons, 1-5, and their defense really has been atrocious. I mean, losing to Seattle 38-25, losing to the Cowboys 40-39 in that amazing comeback from Dak Prescott when he was healthy, losing to the Bears by 4 points, losing to the Packers 30-16, losing to the Panthers 23-16, and then finally getting a big win over the Vikings 40-23 last week. They fired their coach Dan Quinn and their interim coach Raheem Morris, former NFL head coach, I believe, for the Bucs. He is now their interim coach and seems like he's setting a new tone with Atlanta, scoring 40 points against the Vikings. And granted, the Vikings are not that good either. Not as special as we thought they would be at the beginning of the season. But still, offensively, they seem to really have their sorts. Matt Ryan was back. He threw 30 of 40 for 371 yards and 4 touchdowns. Definitely their best game of the season. Julio came to life again. 8 catches for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. Defensively, this team is just lost. They're just giving up points like kids in candy stores on Halloween. And that's something that the Lions can take advantage of, especially if they play a game like they did against the Jaguars, where they control the ball. You know, they give it to as many targets as they can. They were targeting a lot of receivers, I believe 10 on the day. But I definitely think that this is a game that the Lions can win. Now, what am I worried about? I'm worried about defensively. I'm worried about the passing game. Matt Ryan, former MVP. Julio Jones, one of the best receivers in NFL history. The Lions have to do a better job of stopping the pass. And overall, I thought they did well against Jacksonville in this aspect, but there were some plays that they gave up that I'm just like, why can't they stop that? Why can't Okudah get better in man coverage? And, I mean, Trufant was out last week. We'll see what his status is this week, but I don't know. If they match up Jeff Okudah on Julio Jones, Julio might have a field day. He might have a career day if he matches up. But if they start playing some more zone coverage like they've done like they did last week against Jacksonville, if they start getting more pressure on Matt Ryan, you never know. So I would expect a little bit more of that, like what we saw in Jacksonville, seeing more of that zone, seeing more of that pressure. I would expect more in the Atlanta game, but I think this is a game that they can win. They should have no reason to lose this game. Also, this is interesting. And, being a Lions fan, I keep track of this stuff in my head a lot. I believe Matthew Stafford has never played a regular season game in Atlanta before. Kansas City and Atlanta are the only two cities that he's never played a regular season game. Both of those teams, they've played in London in the past, so in terms of NFL scheduling, I think that might be the reason why. But, Matthew, Kelly Stafford, his wife, I think she's from Atlanta. He's got some family out there. Georgia, University of Georgia, not too far away. Could we see a Stafford field day? He seems to always play well in Dallas, where he's from. Hey, you never know. Right in Atlanta, got the family near him. DeAndre Swift, also University of Georgia running back. Not far, Athens, only about an hour from Atlanta. You never know. You never know. Maybe they might be playing with some extra juice in this one because they're so close to home. Matthew, of course, always having good games in Dallas, where he's from. Atlanta, I believe they own a home as well over there. So it's something to look out for and something I'm really excited about. I think the Lions come out of here as winners. And if you look at the rest of the schedule, I mean, the schedule is working out in the Lions' favor. I mean, after Atlanta, they head back home and play the Colts. That game might be a little tough, but Phillip Rivers is old Phillip Rivers. You never know. At Vikings, I know it's a divisional game. Anything can happen, but the Vikings aren't as special as we all thought. Washington next. They're a complete dumpster fire. At Carolina, that game could be tricky. Texans at home on Thanksgiving. Also a game that maybe could be a toss-up, but the Lions should win. Then they go to Chicago. That's going to be a big game. Green Bay at home, at Tennessee, who's tough. Buccaneers and Brady in Week 16. And then Week 17, they play the Vikings at home. So that's going to be a tough last 4 or 5 games or so. But, I mean, those games in between, those 6 games, I mean, those are games that I think the Lions can win. So it's going to be big. These next few weeks are really going to tell what the Lions are made of. And to be honest, it could be telltale signs if Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn return next season. And welcome back here to Open Mic Night, where we have a very special guest in Detroit Lions legend Lomas Brown, who played 11 seasons for the Lions from 1985 to 1995, was a 7-time Pro Bowler, and later won the Super Bowl with Tampa Bay, and he currently serves as your Lions color analyst on WJR along with Dan Miller. Lomas, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's a real pleasure.
So I want to start things off with, you growing up in Miami, obviously very talent-laden, a city of Miami, one of the best football areas in the country. How did growing up in Miami and then graduating from Miami Springs High School, how did that develop you into the football player that you became?
Well, the one thing about Miami is that you could basically play football year-round down there because of the weather. So I think that gives us one advantage over a lot of, cold weather states, that we're playing basically year-round. And I think you get the opportunity to develop your skills by being out there, being around football, being around football players, all the drills that they continuously do throughout the year. So I think you can't help but get better. And then that environment is, everybody talks about Texas, but I think Florida competes with any state as far as football, with the environment that we have down there and some of the advantages that you have down there. And, of course, the players that come out of Florida each and every year. So it's just a great environment to be around if you want to hone in on your football skills. And like I say, the weather doesn't help. It doesn't hamper you at all.
So in the early 80s, when you were, a high school player coming out of Miami, that was kind of around the time when the University of Miami was starting to build their program and become the U with Howard Schnellenberger. Yeah. But, and they were recruiting kind of the state of Miami, obviously the city of Miami up to Tampa and all that. But you didn't go to University of Miami. You actually ended up in Gainesville going to the University of Florida. How did you spur the U for the Florida Gators?
Yeah, you're completely right about those times. So if anybody is familiar with ESPN's 30 for 30 series, they got one called the U. And I lived that because when I was down there, that's when Coach Schnellenberger decided that he wanted to recruit in the inner cities of Miami. Before Coach Schnellenberger, the University of Miami didn't recruit in Miami. They looked outside of Miami. But once Coach Schnellenberger got there in the 80s, they started recruiting in the city of Miami. So I would tell people every day, either I had a recruit at my house from the University of Miami or at my high school waiting on me every day trying to get me to sign there. But I just knew my thing was I started running with the wrong group of guys down in Miami, and I knew I needed to get out of there. I knew I needed to get away from Miami and go somewhere else. That's really one of the real reasons why I ended up at the University of Florida. But I tell you what, Coach Schnellenberger had my dad hook, line, and sinker, man. I mean, he was sold on U of M, and to this day, he never signed my University of Florida scholarship. He was that disappointed that I went to the University of Florida than going to the University of Miami. But everything worked out, and, we could sit back and look at it and now say that's past history. But I actually lived through that time when they called it, when it was on that 30 for 30, the U. That was part of my bringing up.
It's actually funny, Lomas. I was just watching that documentary just a few days ago. So you get to the University of Florida, and you become a very dominating tackle over there, leading that, called it the Great Wall of Florida in the SEC. Yeah. So how did playing in the SEC develop you into the player that you became and eventually into a college football Hall of Famer that you just got named to this year in 2020?
Yes. And a quick story about the Great Wall of Florida. I was actually the last brick to complete the wall. And to complete the wall, if all starting 5 offensive linemen had to be able to bench press 400 pounds, and we had to be able to leg press 800 pounds. And I was the last one that was trying to get over that 400-pound mark. And once I finally got it, man, it was like about 20 guys in the weight room man, him, the weight coach, they just exploded, man, and cheer when I picked up that 400 pounds and finally completed the Great Wall of Florida. But, I mean, man, playing in the SEC, I mean, you're playing in the best division. You're going up against the best players in the country each and every Saturday. Just to go through an SEC season undefeated. I'm not talking about the outside games. I'm just talking about your SEC games. Just to go through that undefeated that's a real accomplishment. So, you know, it hardens you. The SEC hardens you and gets you ready for the next level, which is the NFL. I think the SEC is the closest you could get to trying to simulate the NFL. And you're still not simulating the NFL, but I think that's the closest you could get if you played in the SEC. So I think I had a distinct advantage playing there and then being drafted and going on to play for the Detroit Lions.
So, of course, 1985 rolls around, and you are drafted 6th overall by the Detroit Lions, as you mentioned. Very different than the state of Florida. You don't have that nice weather like you do all year round. You got snow and all that. What were your original thoughts when you found out that you got drafted by the Lions?
Oh, man. Hey, look, it was funny because Daryl, I had never heard from Detroit throughout the whole draft process. Detroit's name, they never had anyone come work me out. Nothing from the Lions. I heard from the Lions for the first time 2 picks before they were going to draft. And Darryl Rogers, who was the coach then, got on the phone and said that if Minnesota picks Chris Dolman and Indianapolis chooses Dwayne Bickett because they wanted a linebacker, he said that they were going to draft me. And lo and behold, that's what happened over those next 2 picks. And I got the phone call from Darryl Rogers saying that they had drafted me. And I was quiet on the phone. It was an awkward silence on the phone. And then he asked me, he said, "Aren't you happy?" And I was like, oh, yeah, I am. But I think I was just more shocked because I didn't know anything about Detroit. Like I say, the first time I ever heard from Detroit was 2 picks before they drafted me. So I was just in complete shock. And like you said, man, you coming from Miami and the lovely weather down there to Detroit, man, it was a rude awakening when I first got here. But, you know, I'm still here. I love this area, and this is home for me now.
So your 6th season comes around 1990. That is when you made your first of 6 Pro Bowls with the Lions. And, of course, you were blocking for Barry Sanders. And, you know, he came in 1989 and really transformed the entire organization. How did his game help elevate your game at left tackle?
Because you had to stay on your blocks. You couldn't take a block off. You couldn't ease up. Even if you were on the backside of a play, you know, you couldn't because of Barry, how he was, his running style. I mean, Barry would cut it all the way back, you know, so you didn't want to be that guy that gave up the tackle, you know, or your guy. You didn't want to be the guy that let your guy get Barry Sanders, you know, so it made you stay on your blocks. And as they taught, as you've been taught since you've been little, coaches always tell you, play to the whistle. Well, that was never more true than when you blocked for Barry Sanders, that you had to play to the whistle because, like I say, the guy was so great. He could make people miss. He could come out of impossible situations. And like I said, you never wanted to be the guy that it was your guy that tackled him. You know, so we always took pride in that. And even when I left the Lions, you know, it was so engraved and so instilled in me that even when I played with other backs, you know, it was still the same with me mentally. I had to stay on my guys, even though they weren't half the back Barry was, but it was just ingrained in me because of playing blocking for Barry for 7 of his 10 years.
Talking to Lomas Brown here, Lions color analyst and former Detroit Lion. So the Lions in the 90s, they also developed a little bit of a passing attack. They had Herman Moore, Johnny Morton, Brett Perriman, and we talked to Mouse Davis, former offensive coordinator for the Lions, last week.
Man,
and, he helped develop a little bit of that run-and-shoot offense. So how did you transition, of course, at University of Florida, really run blocking well, to then becoming a good pass blocker as well?
Yeah, I mean, and that man Mouse is the man. That is the man. Him and June Jones, you're right. They came in and they redesigned the whole offense. They took our whole offense out. They brought in players that fit the run-and-shoot offense, and that's what we ran. And, I thought we ran it great for the years that we had it there. I think our biggest thing was just our defense wasn't on the same level as our offense was back then. So we would score real fast, and it would just put the defense in situations where they ended up playing more plays than we would play during the game on the offensive side of the ball. But, man, the run and shoot was, for scoring and just getting people wide open and just a wide open game, nothing better. Spreading the defense, nothing better. Now, it was tough for offensive linemen, and that's where it comes in at what you're talking about, coming from Florida and having to transition from being a power running type of offensive lineman to, having to become a finesse pass blocker, because with the run and shoot, there's only 5 offensive linemen. You have no tight ends most of the time, and you have no fullback. So if you get beat especially as an offensive tackle, it's no help there. So the next stop for the defensive end is your quarterback. So you had to come along and you had to be able to pass block in that run and shoot offense. And I think that's the thing I'm probably most proud of, is that I was able to transition from, we had the silver stretch, and we had so many different offenses we had. But I say hands down, for offensive linemen and any offensive lineman, but especially tackles, the run and shoot offense is the hardest offense to pass block there.
So you, of course, being the left tackle for the Lions, a staple on that offensive line for 11 seasons, how much has that left tackle position in the NFL changed over a period of time when you played till now?
I think it's changed, but I don't know if it's really changed a lot. I just don't see a big change in it. Of course, if you look at all the linemen, the size of them, is just the one thing that kind of jumps off at you. But I'll have to say that I just think from a technique standpoint, I thought we were better back in the day, because you had to be, because some of the guys that you faced, think about if I went down the list of the defense ends I had to block, I would say the majority of these guys are Hall of Fame type of guys, or, what I'm saying, those type of guys. Your Richard Dents, your Chris Domas, Lawrence Tillers, Bruce Smith, Derek Thomas. Those are guys that I had to block on a regular basis. And I don't think it's defensive ends in the league like that strike fear like that. You got a couple of D linemen and defensive ends. You're talking about your Aaron Donald. You talk about your J.J. Watt, even though he's getting up there. Maybe your Clowney. But it's not a lot of guys like it used to be, man, back in the day. So you had to hone in on your technique. If you didn't hone in on your technique, you were going to get beat on a regular basis. And if you're getting beat on a regular basis in the NFL, that means you're not in the NFL, or you won't be there long. So I don't think it's changed that much, other than the size of these guys. And, of course, what some of these guys are asked to do, which is a lot more pass blocking, because this league is more pass happy than anything else. I think that might be the other change, that these guys have to pass block a lot more than we did back in the day.
So was there a favorite player that you went up against, that you pass rusher or an interior lineman? Was there somebody that you just really loved going against it during your career?
Well, I could tell you the 3 toughest guys I ever faced were Lawrence Taylor, Richard Dent, and Chris Dolman. And I could tell you that me and Richard Dent to this day are friends, good friends. And I could tell you his nickname was Dirty Dent. And I could tell you he lived up to that nickname and stuff. But, you know, he was probably one of the favorites because of what he brought out in me, and I think what I brought out in him. But it was a lot of guys. That's the thing about playing the left tackle position. It be guys that not household names that you go up against that be good. I'm talking about Robert Bennett, who played with the Green Bay Packers back in the day. You know, guys like that don't have big names. Ken Harvey, but guys that were awesome players. You know, and as a left tackle, you playing up against the best pass rusher each and every week from that opposing team. So, you know, I just say those were the three of the greats that I played against. But I would probably say Richard Dent was probably one of the best ones that I faced because of what he brought out in me, and I think what I brought out in him.
So after you left the Lions, you played for a couple other teams. You played for Arizona, then you played for New York, the Giants for a couple seasons, actually went to a Super Bowl with them. But in 2002, your final season, you won the Super Bowl with Tampa Bay and John Gruden, who was their head coach at the time. You went out on top. Of course, Lions fans have been wanting that Super Bowl for a long, long time, but you actually got to experience it, obviously with a different club. But what was that feeling like of elation and joy when you won that Super Bowl?
Oh, my God, man. It was, put it this way, when I lost it 2 years earlier with the Giants, it was the lowest feeling I had in the world. I'm going to give you a quick story about that. I played, when I was with the Giants, my guard was Glenn Parker. Glenn Parker played offensive guard for the Buffalo Bills team that lost 4 Super Bowls in a row. So the night before the Super Bowl, Glenn came to me. He was like, Lomas, he said, if we lose this game, it's going to be the worst feeling you ever felt in your life. And I just kind of blew him off. Yeah, okay, yeah, you lost 4 of them. I can understand, you know. Man, blew him off. When that final whistle went off that next day and we lost that game, man, I thought, man, he was so – I wanted to slit my wrist on the field, right there on the field, and just lay there and just bleed out. And he was so right. It was the worst feeling ever. And now you compare that with 2 years later, getting back to the Super Bowl with Coach Gruden and winning it. Man, it's like you reached the pinnacle. It's the peak pinnacle of your career. You finally went to the top. You can't go any higher because you've gone to the top. This is the NFL. You won a Super Bowl. And that was it, the elation, man, almost just a relief because it was in my 18th year. I mean, I was 39 years old. I didn't have many more shocks at this, and I had went through my whole career and never gotten it. And just to get it in my last year, man, it's just no better way. And I say, man, the first people I thought about when I won the Super Bowl was Barry Sanders, Kevin Glover, Jerry Ball, Chris Spielman, all those guys that I played with back in Detroit who never got an opportunity to get to a Super Bowl, man. You know, I almost felt kind of guilty, you know, winning it because of those guys that I played with so long with, and they never got an opportunity to experience what I did. It's a great, great feeling.
So after you retired from Tampa Bay, you remained very active within the Detroit community, and then also just a few seasons ago, getting into the broadcast booth, replacing legendary Jim Brandstatter, and you and Dan Miller now are on the radio voices for Detroit Lions football. What has that transition from playing now to the broadcast booth?
Yeah, first of all, you're right, legendary, man. It was intimidating. I mean, to take over for somebody like Jim Brandstatter, who had been there 30-plus years, like I say, the voice, he had been the voice of Lions football through the radio. So it was intimidating at first to take over for him. But, you know, I've adjusted, and, it's been a really adjustment this year because of COVID. You know, it's not actually being at the away games, having to call them from Ford Field. That's been quite an adjustment this year. But the whole thing has been, and I just think, what I had to do was, because being an offensive lineman, I would look at the football game from the inside out, meaning I would look at it just from the inside. I'm looking at the line of scrimmage, but becoming a broadcaster and commentator, now I have to look at it from the inside out, and I have to look at not only from the D-line all the way back to the safeties, but the same way on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that was the biggest adjustment for me, looking at the whole total picture rather than just being focused in on my area where I used to play at. Now I got to focus in on all 22 guys, not just the 11 guys on our team, but the 11 guys on the opposing team too. So that's probably been one of the biggest adjustments. But, man, when you got a guy like Dan Miller, man, they've just made, and the team of guys that we have, our producers and engineers and everything, spotters and everything, it just makes it so much easier for you.
So a big win yesterday for the Jaguars. Of course, you mentioned you are not traveling for road games. Called that game from Ford Field, actually, but a big win. Lions get to 2-3. Lomas, how do you see this Lions team really playing out the rest of the season?
Well, they got everything ahead of them, and I tell you what, probably 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't have even thought about, if you look at the Lions right now, everything's ahead of them. They got a 1-4, I think, team, 1-5 team in Atlanta that they're getting ready to face. Now, again, I like to warn everybody, these opposing teams are looking at the Lions the same way. They're looking at the Lions as, hey, it's a game that we should be able to win. I'm quite sure Atlanta's thinking that if the Lions are coming to the ATL, coming to Atlanta in our dome, we should be able to beat a team that's won just 2 games, with all the offensive weapons that we have. But, the Lions, they got them. And you talk about an Indianapolis team. You talking about the Minnesota team. You talking about the Washington football team. So if you look at it, they have everything lined up ahead of them. It's just now if they're going to take advantage of it, which winning that Jacksonville game is a great confidence boost. Now you got to take this into next week, and hopefully they'll be able to keep the momentum going, So after a rocky start, you can't, if I'm a player in that locker room, you couldn't ask for anything to be where we at right now with the opportunities that we have ahead of us. Now it's time for us to go out on this field and continue to get better.
Final question for you, Lomas. I wanted to ask you about the offensive and defensive lines for the Lions. Of course, Frank Ragnow, playing well this season. A couple new pieces on that offensive line. The defensive line getting a little more pressure this week. How important is it for this Lions team to really win their battles up front, and how will that play on out through the rest of the season?
That's where it starts and stops at. And I don't care what level you play on. Man, the O and the D lines, that's where you need to dominate at. That's where your domination has to take place from if you're a football team. And yesterday is a prime example. Our defensive line dominated the offensive line of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that just caused, you could just see how it just caused other problems. So stopping the run game causes problems in the pass game. So to me, and right, you have to be able to protect your passer conversely. So you have to be able to open holes for your running backs like DeAndre Swift, who had over 100 yards rushing yesterday. So when you dominate your lines of scrimmages, it's a great recipe for success in the NFL. So the Lions have to continue to get better up front. That's going to be the catalyst for everything else they do this season, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Lomas Brown, 11-year career with the Detroit Lions, and currently the Lions color analyst on WJR with Dan Miller. Catch him on Sundays for Lions Game Day. Lomas, thank you very much again for joining us here today.
Absolutely. No problem, Noah.
I want to thank Lomas Brown for coming on again. That was a great interview, really getting to know about him and his career, and he's a great man in the community and doing a good job with Dan Miller on 760 WJR. So awesome to hear from him. Really happy he took time out of his busy schedule to come on Open Mic Night. So really, really fun to hear from him. I love getting ex-Lions players and coaches and all that on, and hopefully we'll be doing some more. So thanks again for tuning in. Be sure to check out all the other content that the podcast network has to offer. And next week we have a little Michigan and Michigan State action. Big Ten football coming back. Might do a little something with that next week. Reaching out to a couple guests from Michigan State. Hopefully we can get one of those guys on. So it'll be awesome, and hopefully a Lions victory in Atlanta on Sunday. Thanks again for tuning in, folks. Only on Open Mic Night.